we're a huge fan of yours, and actually one of your books was translated to Ukrainian as well, Baking with Kafka.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of fans out here from our readers who follow you on Instagram and other social media, and we are all very fond, especially of the work that you do with popular science and for new scientists. And congratulations with your recent book, Department of Mind-Blowing Theories, and hopefully it will be translated into Ukrainian very soon. My first question, I read an interview in Creative Review with you, and there you mentioned that often you find humor in unexpected places. So my first question would be, what was the most unexpected place where you found a theme for your cartoon?
Well, when I first started doing cartoons for The Guardian about literature and things, the cartoon used to be on the letters page, and the theme for the cartoon, these days I choose my own themes, but in those days the theme was given to me by the newspaper. And I discovered actually the more funny or interesting the letter was, the harder it was to make a cartoon about. And often the best cartoons came out of the least humorous material, because it left it open to me to be the funny one. So I quite often find I'm not looking for wacky parts of science to make cartoons from. It's quite often thinking and reading and finding real science to be inspired by. So yeah, I can't think of an example of a particularly dry one, but that's often where the cartoons come from, is not a funny idea, but a serious idea, and then taking that to a silly place.
Yeah, so how do you, when you work with new scientists and science themes, how do you find those ideas? Do you read, what media do you read? Maybe some other media to just get informed, or maybe you talk to scientists to get those insights about what is it like to be a scientist, and all those small funny details you use in your comics?
Well, when I started making the cartoons, that was the thing that worried me, because I've always been a big reader, and I was working in the world of arts and publishing. So making the Guardian cartoons, like in Baking with Kafka, felt like it came from somewhere that I understood. Whereas I didn't study science past high school. I've always had a sort of vague interest in it, but I've never really been educated in science. So that was my worry, that I would come across as an idiot, or I'd make terrible, embarrassing mistakes that the scientists would be furious about, or I just wouldn't find enough material to make the cartoons every week. And the thing you're talking about, the finding the ideas, the finding that the small spark which sets off an idea is the difficult part. I know when I've got an idea, I can make it look pretty, and I know I can organize the idea on the page so it makes sense to a reader. But that first thing of finding something interesting to say, or an interesting way to look at something, is what's difficult. So I'm always, having 2 weekly deadlines means I'm always looking for ideas, and I always carry notebooks and sketchbooks and have apps on my phone to not note down even the tiniest beginning of an idea, so that when the deadline starts coming, I'm not starting from nowhere. There's a kind of compost of half-formed or 1/10 formed ideas to work from. So I read New Scientist magazine. I follow various scientists on Twitter. I listen to BBC science programs and Radio Lab, which is an American science podcast. And what else do I do? I don't have many friends who are scientists, but I've got a handful, and they're quite useful, because there's a certain type of question you want to ask which you can't quite formulate for Google. It's too nebulous. So it's quite nice to have friends who I can have a conversation with, rather than rather than just looking things up, which is two different ways of finding knowledge, I suppose.
Thank you. Have you ever, were you ever criticized by the science community for getting something wrong? Because we sometimes do, it may be a tiny detail, but it really kind of is upsetting for scientists. Does it ever happen to you in your work?
Well, when I started, because as I was saying, I was concerned that that would happen and that I'd get lots of things wrong. And I would say in general, people have always been much keener to correct me on the literature cartoons than on the science cartoons. Maybe it's because I'm more paranoid about getting things wrong, but I think also science has built into it, doesn't it? That idea that it's a theory or a hypothesis. It's not all definite. And scientists seem, on my social media, more likely to join in with enthusiastic suggestions for more versions of something or another funny idea than to correct me. I may have got things wrong, but people seem to have let them fly in general. And I've enjoyed that. I think the scientists seem, or people who know about science, not even trained scientists, seem more likely to be excited that there's a cartoon about their area of interest than trying to nitpick some problem with it.
Yeah, let's step back for a while from the science cartoons, and talk a little bit about your style. You have a very distinctive style, but it is very interesting how you found it. So, what was this process when you found your own style?
Well, drawing has always been my thing. It was what I did since I was a child, and I always enjoyed art at school, but I'd also draw in my spare time, and it's something I just do naturally for the pleasure of it, and I'd do it even if it wasn't my job. And I went to art school, and there, like lots of young artists, I was desperately trying to find a style and find a way of making work which was, you know, everyone would love and was deep and dark and thoughtful and showed every aspect of my wonderful soul. And it's really difficult to do that. And I didn't ever come across a style then which really worked until I started making comics. And then, because I wasn't focused on style, I wasn't focused on making a pretty picture, I was focusing on telling stories and making jokes. I ended up using this very simple style I use often with stick men or at least very simple characters, which is the way I'd draw a diagram to explain how something worked or how I'd doodle when I wasn't thinking anyone was looking. And that's what I used for my first comic strips. And maybe I was thinking I'd figure out how to do comics and then I'd make more intricate pictures or more arty pictures. But I just got into the habit of drawing in this pared down style. And I still want it to look attractive. And I spend a lot of time on the composition and laying things out, but everything is very simply drawn. And I suppose it's just because I'm interested in the pictures, but I'm more interested in telling stories with the pictures. So it's more of a language for telling stories than a way of making a beautiful picture, if you see what I mean.
Thank you. Actually, if we have questions at this point, you can start unmuting yourself, but I will just keep going until someone has their question. One more from me is about your color blindness. I found out about it in the New York Times interview.
Right.
How do you use a lot of color in your works, and especially with diagrams and different colors for different things and so on. How do you cope with that? How do you use color regardless of your color blindness?
Well, when I was at school, I guess primary school, so aged about 10 or 11, there was somebody came to the school and they did what are called Ishihara tests, which are pictures made of lots of colored circles. And if you're colorblind, you can't see the numbers that are written secretly inside the circles. They're quite beautiful things, the Ishihara tests, actually. And that told them that I'm not completely colorblind, but I have what's called red-green color blindness. So I can look at something that's skin colored and lime green, and they can look very similar to me. So I can, when I used to paint with at art school with acrylics or oils, I would have problems. I'd have to ask people, is this green or brown? And it was difficult. The good thing now is, because I work on the computer, I can look at the CMYK numbers for each of the colors and see how much, see whether it's green or brown mathematically. And that's useful for places where color does matter, where you're getting someone's skin color, or where it matters, I can check it up. But a lot of the time I just go with what looks nice to me on screen. And in the diagrams you're talking about, it doesn't really matter if it's green or brown. If it looks nice to me, I go with it. And you'd be surprised. I think color blindness is very prevalent in designers and artists. My editor and designer at Drawn & Quarterly, Tom Devlin, is colorblind as well. So when we design a book cover, we have to get a third person to check it, because neither of us is entirely sure what's going on with that color. So it's something I guess I've just got used to. I do wonder if I wasn't colorblindness, I'd find coloring easier. It's probably one of the, when I'm trying to make a realistic picture, the coloring is a tricky part. And I've just finished, I've written and drawn a children's book, and that's all quite naturalistically colored. And that was very slow to do because I wasn't confident in it. And I think in some way that confidence is a voice in the back of my head coming from the color blindness. So yeah, it definitely affects me, but maybe on some level it makes me make more interesting choices for colors. I don't know.
Thanks for the answer. Are you working on you just finished the book, right? For the children, so it's not yet published.
No.
Can you tell us a little bit about this book?
Well, no, I can't really. It'll be coming out in about a year, and it'll be announced then. It's the first time I've written a story for children. And it was a fascinating process, the changing from the world of comics to the world of picture books, both of which use words and pictures, but in slightly different ways. So it's been a fun challenge, and I shouldn't really tell you anything about it. In fact, you can see behind me the proofs of it on the table there, but they should be seen. I won't talk about it.
Yeah, thanks. In a year, you're saying, so this is a really long process when you just finish the book and when it gets to the readers.
Yeah, the process of my comic books tends to be shorter than that. It's probably about 6 months between finishing the book and publishing it. But for some reason, children's books, lots of reasons involving libraries and other things, they finish the book much earlier. So yeah, it's funny to have a pretty much finished book that will be another year before it comes out.
Can you tell a little more? This is very, very interesting. I didn't know that you were working on this, so didn't prepare the questions, but it's really interesting. How is it different? How was it different to work to make a book for children than writing and making cartoons for adults? And maybe you can tell more about the process of finding the publisher and so on. How was it for you? Obviously, you have already the name, everyone knows you, but how did you choose the publisher then and so on? Well,
I have 2 children. They're now 12 and 14, but there was a period, maybe 5 years, when I guess, like most parents, I was reading them stories every single night and would grow to love some picture books, and there was other ones I'd hide because I hated reading them so much. And I guess over those years, I realized I did want to do a picture book. And the big difference, I suppose, is with my cartoons and with the graphic novels, you're putting words and pictures on a page and they come together inside the reader's head and tell a story together. But with a picture book, especially for young children, you're kind of writing a script for a performance by a parent to a child who's looking at the pictures but probably can't read the words. So it's quite a different, method of that information going from the page to the reader or the child being read to's head. And some of the tools which are really fun to use in comics don't work for that, for that. And there are other tools in comics which are really fun to use in children's books. So it took me a while to write the story and understand. I wrote a 3,000 word draft of the story and spoke to someone who knows about children's books and said no parent wants to spend that long reading a story, so I had to shorten it. And then the publisher gave me lots of, not big things, but little tips of how to make it function better for, I think before I had children and before I talked to the publisher, I could have still written an interesting book, but I think it might have been a difficult, sort of quirky, difficult read. And I wanted to make one which really would be like a classic bedtime story that would have all the things I love to do, but also function in that very specific form of reading to a tired child in the evening. So that was a whole learning process. And in terms of the technical way of getting it published, previously, I've always dealt directly with Drawn and Quarterly, who are my English language publisher, and then they've sold the books to the rest of the world. But for the children's book, I got an agent who then dealt with all that for me. And that was a different experience, but I think because there's a bigger world of children's books and there's a bigger market, it's not like the world of comics, which can be quite friendly and people know each other, and quite a lot of my friends work directly with publishers without agents. It felt like better to go through the official route. And it helped my confidence because it was the first time I'd done it. So that all worked out quite well.
Thank you. And another question is about your routine, because writers often have writer's block. Do you ever have an artist's block? How do you manage your creative workflow? Do you have maybe some tips when you're stuck? Can you share with us about that?
Well, I do get writer's block, and I tend to get it on I've written 2 longer stories called Goliath and Mooncop, and I definitely had moments of getting quite stuck with those and feeling I was wasting my time working on them and putting them away for more than a month at a time to work on something else. And both of those, it was hard work to get them finished. I'm really happy with them, and there were periods I enjoyed, but it felt like hard work. The great thing about weekly cartoons, like the one I make for New Scientist and the one I make for The Guardian, is you can't really get writer's block if there's a deadline coming, or you can, but you have to hand something in. So that helps me and stop. I think one of the things that causes writer's block is perfectionism. You want to make the most perfect thing possible, and it's not possible to make a perfect thing. So the gap between perfection and what you have in front of you is painful. And the nice thing about a weekly deadline is it just makes me think they need something. And I like the people at this newspaper, and I know how upset they'll be with an empty space. So I need to take even something that isn't as perfect as I want it to be, and I need to, in the next 3 hours, make it as good as I can and hand it in. And I think even if you don't have a deadline like that, that's the way to make work, is to just keep going. I think that there are times when pausing on something and coming back to it with a better perspective is good, but in general, just carrying on is the way to do it. And I wish I could trick myself into working on my projects without those short deadlines, to working in that same way, because it's much nicer to, at the end of the year, realize you've done 104 cartoons without really thinking about them as a body of work. So that's the nice thing about working in weekly increments.
Yeah, and maybe a little bit more about your daily routine. I know that you are working in the studio right now. Obviously, there's you probably work from home, or maybe not, but like at least our team is working from home, and maybe
Yes.
I don't know, a lot of people work from home. Can you tell more about that? How your work routine changed maybe because of the coronavirus?
Well, in London, where I'm not at the moment, I have a studio that I share with two other artists, and I go there every day. I get there for about 8 o'clock or 8:30, and I work a kind of normal working day till about 5:30. And that is how I'd always worked. And if throughout that day I might go for a walk or go and work in a coffee shop for a while, but I never really work from home normally. And now I'm staying at my wife's father's house in the countryside. So instead of walking through busy London and going to a coffee shop, I'm walking around a garden or wandering across a field to try and find my ideas. So it's quite a change, and I'm managing to get work done, but I kind of miss the buzz of being in a busy place to make the work.
Thank you. And now I'm going to pause again. Maybe someone wants already from our readers to ask a question, and you can unmute your microphone and go ahead. And if not, then I'm going to proceed. Or you also can, I have someone who sent the questions to me in the chat, so I will read, there are 3 of them, but I will read one of them. What are the career prospects of a scientific illustrator? Do they organize exhibitions, catalogs of personal works? How do they work on the promotion and formation of personal brand? There is a question like that from our readers.
Okay. You know, I don't really know any other scientific illustrators, and I'm not sure if I would necessarily describe myself as that. I mean, there are people who make scientific illustration and natural history illustration, and that's definitely a career you can have. But I don't really know much about that. I've sort of come into it by accident. I started by, I occasionally made illustrations for New Scientist magazine, so they'd send me an article and I'd make an image to accompany it. And I always enjoyed that, and enjoyed the process of reading a scientific article and trying to come up with a visual accompaniment for it. And that led me to get to know the editor and like working with the art director. And I just one day sent them a postcard and said, if you ever want a weekly comic strip about science, I'd love to do one. And they said yes straight away. At the time, they didn't have a cartoon in the magazine. Now they have 2, actually. So it was kind of an accident, and I don't know if most of the people who I know who work for New Scientist are general illustrators who get hired to do art, to do stuff for them. So yeah, I can't really answer the question technically on that. I guess I'm a sort of amateur who's blundered into the world of science, which I really enjoy, but I haven't yet met anybody who does it properly.
And can you answer the second part of the question about the promotion and formation of your personal brand? Do you do it by yourself, managing all the social media and so on, or do you have a team who helps you out with all of that?
No, I do it on my own. When I've got a book coming out, the publisher will get involved, and I have a publicist for Department of Mind-Blowing Theories, which is my new book, and she'll help with that. But normally it's just me. And when I started making cartoons in about 2001, I was self-publishing with a friend. And I think from the beginning we had a very rudimentary website. But over my career, over the 20 years of making cartoons, social media as a place to show your work has definitely become it's become a thing. And I sort of blundered into using Twitter by accident, really, just going on there because people I liked were tweeting things in the early days, and I started sharing my cartoons. And I think I've been quite lucky that my cartoons, especially the ones for The Guardian and New Scientist, are quite social media friendly. The pictures are small enough to share. They're like a little treat. You know, if you write a graphic novel, you're not going to be able to share that on the internet easily. But my ones work quite well on there. So I don't try and overthink the branding aspect. I just, both the magazines I work for are happy for me to share the cartoons, and so I put them on there. And if I do something else I think is interesting, I put it on there. But I never really make work specifically for the internet or for self-promote. Maybe a little something once in a while, but I think I'm lucky that I get paid to do these 2 cartoons, which happen to be good fodder for the machine. And I think I could go a bit mad if I was making lots of work specially to be shared. And then I'd probably worry even more than I do about how many people like something or share something, which I know I know I shouldn't do, but I can't help doing as well. So I think I try not to get too involved with that.
Do you read all your comments on social media, or maybe get upset sometimes by them or by the amount of likes, dislikes, and so on?
It's interesting, you know, if you were going to be scientific about it, it is interesting to see what people like. When a cartoon, I'll do one, I'll think, oh, that's such a good one. And then it doesn't get very many likes. And then I do one that I think is rather mediocre and it gets thousands of likes. And then I think, well, maybe that was just one that worked better on a screen in a moment, and maybe the other one will work better in a book where people have more time to engage with it. So that side of it's interesting to me. And I read most of the comments. I try to resist, you know, that there's a certain sort of person with you on the internet. And personally, I don't have the sort of personality where that makes me happy. So I don't do much engaging with people, but a little. And it's sometimes nice to correct something or to thank someone. So a little bit of that's fine, but I think too much of it would drive me mad.
Thank you. Maybe someone wants to join and you can unmute yourself and ask the question if you want to, or you can send the questions to the chat or privately to me. If not, then I will proceed with my questions. I'm also very interested in how you first...
Somebody's putting their hand up. I can't see it.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I have a quick question. Hey, we have here a quick question. Hey, Tom, nice learning about you so closely, and this is awesome. Following you in New Scientist and the books. Question, turning back a little bit to the silly point. We were trying to ask in your Instagram review, inspired by your time traveling machine. So picture this, you're going back in the past, meeting yourself, I don't know, 15 years back when you already started doing this. What would you give an advice to yourself as a cartoonist back in that time? What would be like those 1 minute that you can spend with yourself, what you just squeeze into it?
15 years ago. What would I say? I think, what did I do? I'm trying to think what went wrong when I was starting out. I think one of the things I did for years was felt the way to be a successful cartoonist was I had to write a great, long, huge, fat graphic novel of hundreds of pages that would look like a real novel, not like a comic. And I wasted a lot of time overthinking that and feeling bad that I was writing short cartoons rather than longer ones. And obviously, eventually, I did write 2 shortish graphic novels. But the advice I would give to myself and I would give to anybody starting out is, I think it's a pretty rare person who can go from not having done any comics to writing a great, fat, brilliant graphic novel. There are some people who've done it, but it's a little bit like if in school, if you, instead of teaching children how to write sentences and one-page essays, if you sort of sat them down sort of when they're quite young and said, right, we're all going to write a novel now. It's not how you learn. You learn by making experiments, and you make it by experimenting and learning by doing things. And with hindsight, but I also did do the short cartoons, and that's my advice to people starting out is experiment and make lots of shortish things and try and almost find your language before you try and say too much with it.
Thank you. I accidentally muted all. Let me just fix it to allow everyone to unmute themselves. So once again, if you want to ask a question, you can raise a hand or just give a sign or unmute yourself and just start asking. So does anyone want to join in?
Yeah,
If not,
yeah. Question. Yeah, hi Tom, hi everyone. So every artist that I was able to talk with said like drawing is simple and everyone can draw something, but most of tutorials are just like draw one circle, then draw one more, and do a few more simple steps like that, and you will see beautiful, amazing tiger or like wherever, which is not simple at all. And I find it too hard to draw something cool. I'm a software engineer, and for me it's easy to understand that I've done something great or maybe some bullshit because I have some standards. So my question is, do you have your own maybe standards? How do you understand that your illustration is good enough to finish with it and just publish it and so on? And how often do you feel like, oh, I could have done better?
Oh, sorry. I will. 1 second, Tom. Oh, okay. Now speak.
I'm on now.
Yeah.
No, that's a good question. And I read somebody, I can't remember now who it was, writing very interestingly about how if you love something and want to do it, you probably love it because you've seen really good work in it. So your understanding of what good work is high, but before you've made any work, your skill level is almost certainly going to be low, and your starting out on getting better is going to involve making work which doesn't live up to the standards of the heroes who inspired you to do it. And I suppose I was lucky. I was doing a lot of that figuring out at art school, where everybody's being encouraged by each other, and even though we know we're not great at it, we're kind of all at that level learning together. So a bit of sort of having people around me helped with that. And I suppose it's just a feeling that you're also, I think one is not really the person to judge one's own work, really. You're too tied up in the making of it in some ways. So you can't really expect to love your own work the way you love the artists who you're comparing yourself with. So I suppose on some level, I give myself a pass through that. And I guess, like I was saying with the weekly deadline, is you could always think, oh, I need to make this better, but it's better to put out something which is imperfect and then keep going and make more things than to, I think, to work forever on one perfect thing. So it's, with me, I suppose it's just a desire to make things, and I want to make them, and I want to share them with people, even if they're not quite as amazingly perfect as I'd like them to be. But I think the more you do it, the more you realize that's an impossible thing to aim for. And some of my favorite artists do draw in very stripped down, simple ways, and it's not that those people aren't talented, or that you could copy them and still get what they've got, but they're using simple techniques to tell sometimes more interesting stories. So I'm quite fond of very simple work, so I'm happy with the few circles to tell a story with.
I have one more question in the chat. So metaphorical versus literal illustration, when each of them is more appropriate?
Well, I don't know if I have a rule for when the two, what's more appropriate. I'm trying to, I think with my illustrations, I probably tend towards the literal in order to tell jokes, because I suppose my humor is quite down to earth and is I'm trying to think metaphorical. I guess I don't think I use that many metaphors. I think there's a type of illustration which does do that, but I suppose my stuff is taking real things and maybe presenting them in a funny way, but it's not as dreamlike as I'm imagining when I think of metaphorical illustration.
I have a question. Do you test ever your jokes, your cartoons on your friends or family? And maybe you can share some of your techniques, how you make them funny. Do you have any technology, like to use punchline here on the last piece of comic, or how to maybe manage the eyeballs of people who are seeing it, just to see this first and then this the second and so on?
Well, managing people's eyeballs is a really good, I've never thought of it like that, but it's a very good description of what you're doing with a cartoon, which is a diagram. Often your timing is what's funny, and you're managing people's eyeballs as they move across that page to get the funniest story happening in their head in time. So that technical aspect is something I love. And I think one of the things I like is there aren't rules to it. Well, there are some rules, but you can always break them and always do things differently. And it's always a challenge to make that work in the best possible way. And I'll spend a lot of time with scraps of paper, redrawing things and moving it around and thinking, would it be a little bit, because a lot of the time there's a basic joke which is there and it's, say, level 6 funny, and I'm trying to nudge it in little ways to get up to 7 or 8 by just making that a pause that is an imagined pause longer, or to make this information more important. So there's a lot of slightly uninteresting technical stuff where I'm making things bigger or smaller on the computer sometimes, and all those things to just try and make the joke as funny as possible. What was I've forgotten the first part of the question.
The first one was either you show your comics, test it on someone, whether it's funny or not, before you publish them.
Yeah, no, I don't at all. I just do them myself. I send a rough version to the Guardian, but not to New Scientist. And Guardian, sometimes they'll have a comment on it, but most of the time they just say, that's great, we'll publish it. And New Scientist, unless there's an actual mistake in it, I just do it and send it to them. I think when you hold up a cartoon to someone and say, is this funny? It puts them into a kind of terrified panic that they'll react wrongly, or that they won't get it, or it doesn't help. And in that mindset, that person can't give you a natural reaction to the work. So I think it's not worth it. And I've, in the past, shown things to people and they haven't found them funny. And it's made me think they're not funny. And then later I've realized, oh, it doesn't matter. I'm going to have to send it in anyway. And then everybody loves it when they're not in that horrible rabbit in a headlight thing. So yeah, my theory is, if occasionally some of the cartoons are not funny or too weird or too strange, maybe 1 in 10 being not working is a small price to pay. Whereas I think if I got into more of a focus group of asking people for their opinions, maybe you wouldn't have those really awful ones, or not awful, the ones that don't work, but you'd also lose some of the ones which work because of their strangeness, or they're funny and you can't even quite say why, or they're not funny, they're just interesting. So my theory is that I just try and make it work in my head on the page, and if sometimes that results in weird misfires, that's the price to pay.
Thank you. Let's ask again if someone has a question.
Follow-up?
Yeah,
hey,
sure.
Tom, you spoke a bit about your process of your work, and you shared your notebooks, which also shows that you basically explore areas, switch between. I would like to specifically ask about your process. What do you like in your process most, and what do you hate? And hate, I know, maybe finishing this work, maybe coloring part, I don't know which part, but what do you hate and how you basically cope with it and making it work for you?
I think the hardest part is the very first part, the coming up with the beginning of an idea. And that to me is all art and no craft. There's really nothing you can really do. Hard work might sometimes come up with an idea, but sometimes it doesn't come up with anything. There's no relation between amount of effort, thinking, and quality of idea when I do that. So there's a lot of time spent drawing in my notebook and nothing coming of it. And then other days, I just walk for 7 paces and I have an idea which works. And that's the most frustrating part of making these cartoons, is that feeling that you can't seem to quite figure out how to make the ideas happen. And I think that's maybe why the cartoons work, is you can't see where those ideas came from. And once I have that, the enjoyable parts, I suppose there's a lovely wave of relief when I have an idea and I figured out how to make it work on the page. And I know I'll be able to draw it. And then that bit in the middle, I think, is the most enjoyable part, when you can feel the idea coming together and you realize it's going to be good and you're just sort of nudging it higher in the funny level. That's very enjoyable. And then there's a bit at the end, which I suppose is the stuff which is all craft, where it's about making it look as nice as possible and coloring it and all those things, which sometimes is enjoyable because I think, oh, it's a good idea and it's going to look very nice. And then there are other days when I'd really like to I've done the fun bit, I just want to snap my fingers and have a finished cartoon. I don't think I'm going to discover anything more, but there's these technical steps to go through. So sometimes they're pleasurable and sometimes they're not. Like today, I went for a walk. I went for a walk around the garden, and I've been sitting in my sketchbook. Let me grab this. Where's my sketchbook? Here it is. I've been just idly doodling, and I've been drawing explosions, not for any reason, but I was quite enjoying that idea of trying to capture on paper a kind of ridiculously over-the-top explosion. And then for a few days I've had my mind, I want to write a cartoon which uses that, but obviously the cartoon can't just be a drawing, it needs more than that. So today I went for my little walk around the garden and came up with an idea. I'll show you, don't screenshot it because it hasn't been published yet, but I had this idea of a scientist who's saying he's got a little explosion here, and then there's an absolutely colossal one, and he's saying, "Damn it! Even Professor Wilson's failures are more impressive than mine." And I really enjoyed drawing the explosion. And tomorrow I'm quite looking forward. I don't always look forward to coloring, but I feel like it'll be fun to just, like I was saying, nudge the ridiculousness of the cartoon further and further up as I color it. So that one, because the idea came easily and because it's an idea where the drawing's kind of fun, all elements of doing that one have been enjoyable. And then there's some weeks it's really hard work and I don't enjoy any of it. And then I realize people really like it and it's a nice cartoon. And so the pleasure is nothing to do with making it. It's purely finishing it.
Well, that's amazing. And thank you very much for showing your doodles and actual finished product. I'm looking forward to seeing it probably in New Scientist, right?
Yes, that'll be, I guess, in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. It'll be there, fully colored.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. And I also wanted to ask a follow-up question. You mentioned Radiolab and BBC Science, but can you tell what scientists do you follow? Who inspire you? Maybe in some different fields, so that our readers can also follow them and maybe read the ones that you read.
Well, I suppose most of the people, most of the scientists I'm finding out about are people retweeted and shared by those media outlets. So I really like BBC Inside Science, which is a weekly science program. And through that, I started following Adam Rutherford, who's the presenter, but he's also a scientist. And through him, I started following a physicist called Jim Al-Khalili, who is a broadcaster. And through Twitter, I discovered his program, which is called The Life Scientific, where he has half-hour-long interviews with scientists about their careers. So I guess I go on these, I guess like a lot of us do on the internet, you go on these sort of tunnels of one person connecting to another. But I suppose it was through Jim Al-Khalili, I can't remember what his Twitter handle is, but I can tell you afterwards. And through him, I see other scientists being retweeted. And I mean, for the cartoons, I'm always trying to understand new areas of science. And my dream is to write a really good quantum physics joke. I like following physicists, and I like the idea of all these kind of quantum physics and parallel universes and wormholes and all that sort of mind-bending science. But I feel like there probably is a really good quantum physics joke, but I still haven't understood it well enough to find an interesting way, which isn't just another Schrodinger's cat joke, which I'm not against and I've done. But I'm hoping one day I'll get to a level of knowledge which doesn't have to be terribly high, but high enough to make a joke which I would find funny, and hopefully someone who understood physics, quantum physics would find funny. So hopefully one day that'll happen.
Cool. We have 10 more minutes, and maybe we can squeeze as many questions from our readers as possible. So does anyone want to ask a question? You can just unmute yourself, or I can read one. I got one in the chat.
Okay.
What is the work of your dreams? A cover of a certain edition, another book, exhibition, or something else? And what artists, illustrators have influenced you and are influencing now?
Well, I can't think now if there's, I would have said before I worked on covers for the New Yorker that was my dream, to do a cover for them. And I've done a few now, and it's my dream to do more of them. And they're very difficult. They're very difficult ideas to come up with, because for me, those pictures have to be like one of my cartoons, but without the words. So you're trying to tell a story just in pictures, which is difficult. And they're very picky about what they put on the cover. So that is, my dream is to keep doing those, I suppose. And I suppose my dream is just to keep trying, to keep making work. And I'm not somebody who makes huge changes in, I have a style that I work in, but I'm always trying to move it on just a little. I mean, doing the kids book, I think when you see it, you'll realize it's definitely my work, but I think I've I've opened just a little bigger area to work in there. And I've always been interested in animation, and I'm from time to time talk to people about making animated projects. I've done a handful, but nothing which I've been hugely creative in. So something involving some animation would be fun. And at the moment, now I'm finished the kids' book, I'm thinking about writing a new graphic novel. So that's on my mind, writing that. And in terms of people whose work has inspired me, my first big inspiration was Edward Gorey, who's an American, he's dead now, but he was an American illustrator and book artist. He didn't quite draw comics, but like comics, they were words and pictures telling a story. And he was a very big influence on my early work, some of which was probably too influenced by him, but I think everyone goes through that stage when they're starting out. And now I suppose the last 10 years when I've been making these short cartoons, there's been a different type of influence of other people who make those funny cartoons. So Michael Kupperman, who writes very silly cartoons, he's an American cartoonist. He was a big influence on my, especially the more surreal and silly work is inspired by him. And there's a British illustrator who was mainly working in the 30s called William Heath Robinson. He was particularly famous for inventing crazy machines, which did a really silly, quite often did a very simple thing like cooking a single pea, but there'd be a huge machine made to do it. And he, however silly the machines were, you could look at them and you could see how they would work. And there was a commitment to the joke with him, which I think is wonderful. And he was an amazing illustrator and drawer. And I'd kill to be able to draw as clearly and beautifully as he does. So he's another influence, and hundreds of other people, but that's three who come to mind.
Well, thank you. Does anyone want to join and ask a question? Just, you can unmute yourself or raise a hand or wave or send your question to the chat. Just as a follow-up to what you've said already, I wanted to ask, you all also often use some very interesting structures. How do you come up with them? Like, for instance, the mazes, or the ones where you have to assemble book titles or different things from different rows. How do you think of the forms ideas, not the ideas about the meaning? I hope you understand what I'm driving at. But the forms, where do you find those forms?
Well, no, that's an interesting question. Because I do have this space every week, which is weirdly more or less the same size, the same format, and almost size as this little picture I can see of myself in front of me. One of the things which I'm interested in is how to use that space to tell stories in different ways. And I think I would get bored if my cartoon every week was a single panel with some text below, or 4 panels with a joke at the end. And one of the ways that I come up with ideas, sometimes I come up with the idea and find a form to kind of pour it into. And some weeks I think of an interesting form and sort of reverse engineer the joke. I mean, I did one quite recently, which was based on the golden section. So it's a kind of spiral. And I realized that could be panels of a comic strip. And then I have to figure out how to make something interesting which uses that. And also quite often in science, diagrams and layouts on the page are used to express concepts. So it kind of makes sense to sometimes use one of those to tell a joke with. So I think it's just, I'm quite interested in information graphics and different ways of telling a story, and it's partly just to keep me interested. I don't want to do the same thing every week. And it is a good way when you have no ideas, if there's a form you can start with, then, you know, some people always say, oh, you know, well, I think some people think that it's a bad idea to be overly worried about form, and you should almost just have some blazing, beautiful idea inside you and then figure out what to do with it. But I'm not sure I agree. I think sometimes thinking, oh, I'm going to do a comic strip that's 100 panels long and they're all really tiny, then that can set your brain working in a different way. So it's all really about tricking me into feeling interested in something and interested enough to start making it good, and then it's good enough to keep you interested, and then it sort of spirals into being a finished cartoon.
Thanks. And is there a particular approach that you used in order to assemble the books Baking with Kafka and Department of Mind Blowing Theories? The places that you put your cartoons on, was it random, or did you have some maybe approach that you wanted to put this one first and then second and so forth?
Well, it's basically, I think I start off with the cartoons in chronological order of how they appeared in the newspaper, but then I move the very best ones to the front, and the ones that are sort of the very, very best go at the front, and the second best go at the end. So hopefully people begin the book with the very best cartoons and keep going, and you end with the nice feeling of the very best ones at the end. And then throughout the rest of the book, I move them around. So it's almost trying to avoid having two cartoons that speak to each other too much. I want them to each be a separate joke. So if they connect too much, then I move them apart. If they're too similar, I move them apart. And if there's one which is, I don't want two very wordy ones next to each other. So it's really just swapping them around and trying, there's no exact system, but it's trying to make the reading experience about the individual cartoons. It's the opposite of writing a long graphic novel where you're telling a story. It's more just trying to make each of them able to shine in its own way. But also, if you did sit and read start to end, that you end with some of the the better ones. So you come away pleased and go on the internet and buy another one of my books.
And the better ones, you mean that the ones you like the most, or maybe, or how do you understand that they're the better ones?
The ones, I suppose the ones I like the most, and I suppose at the beginning and the end, I want the ones which are maybe the most easily enjoyable. In the middle of the book might be the ones that you need to work at a little more, or the ones which are strange rather than outwardly funny. So I suppose the welcoming ones I want at the beginning.
Thank you so much. And I think if we have one more question, we can, if someone wants to ask it, we can squeeze one more. Or if not, then does anyone want to ask a question? Last chance to talk to Tom. Okay, if not, then Tom, thanks so much for your time. This was such a pleasure to talk to you, and very interesting to know more about your approach and about your books. And hopefully soon we'll get in the Ukrainian version of your latest ones. And we'll be looking forward to the picture book.
Okay, well, thank you very much. They were really thoughtful questions. I've enjoyed